My name is Jocelyn Ramirez. I am the chef and founder of Todo Verde here in Los Angeles, which is a plant-based food business. Obviously, you've heard of it, right? Because you're here now. Um, and I am here teaching this class because I wanted to be able to teach more culturally relevant plant-based dishes that feel familiar. Many of us growing up, first of all, plant-based food wasn't that great just a few years ago, but even more so, it wasn't culturally relevant. It meant you were eating an acai bowl somewhere or kale salad somewhere. It didn't really mean that you were eating carne asada tacos. So I'm so happy to be sharing this recipe and this class with you all. And then hopefully you can go on and share it with your friends and family and see what they think. And then we'll eventually create shifts in the bigger scheme of things, little by little, right? So let's get into the ingredients. I'm going to talk a little bit about them as I go through them, and we'll start to work some of these ingredients. I will turn on this hot water kettle right behind me to get my water nice and hot, just to get that going. And that should be pretty quick. So let's talk about carne de soya. So this is an ingredient that you have likely seen at your local Mexican grocery store. It typically comes in sort of this like coarse texture. It's essentially soy that has been broken down and dried or dehydrated so that it's essentially just super dry. It's really crumbly. I had this other bag of it that had a smaller crumble, and then this newer bag that I just opened that had a larger crumble. So, this is La Fiesta, the one that I picked up at my local Mexican grocery store. You can pick this up at health food stores, at many grocery stores, Asian markets. They're typically in the produce aisle of your grocery store, and they're great because you just have to add, it's a really, really neutral base. And you just have to add that moisture, that seasoning, that sazon to get it to the point where it starts to really take on this flavor of a carne asada. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to, I'm heating up the water, and this is 2 cups of textured soy meat. And I'm going to use 1.5 cups of hot water. So I'm going to use like hot boiling water. I'll get a spatula, I'll incorporate it in, and then you'll see that it's going to look really watery at first, but then this is like a sponge. It's going to start to absorb some of that moisture. So that's just going to help us start to get that initial rehydration happening. And you might use somewhere between 1.5 cups to 2 cups of that hot water, depending on the size of your some people use soy curls, like textured soy curls, or these pieces. So if you have bigger pieces and that may need more liquid, you can totally go ahead and add more of that moisture to it as needed. So if you see if it's not really penetrating to the center, you can add more liquid to it. So I'm going to grab that hot water in a moment. The other ingredients that I have here are, I have a 1/2 cup of cooking oil, and I'm just going to be using grapeseed oil, which is my preferred oil for cooking at home. But you can absolutely use avocado oil if you have canola oil, and olive oil, which is, I would say, better for cooking than extra virgin olive oil, because extra virgin olive oil is for me more of like a finishing, a nicer quality oil that you don't necessarily need to use in a recipe like this, because you're not looking for that flavor enhancement that the olive oil provides. And also, you're just going to mask that flavor. So why spend, the extra quality oil on something that's not going to end up tasting like olive oil? So I can hear that my hot water is boiling now. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And I have a measuring cup. I actually have 3 cups of water in here because I'm going to make masa for tortillas. So I've already measured some of that out. So I'm going to pan down here. I'm going to just do 1.5 cups to start off. So I have my cup measurement here, and I'll eyeball about 1/2 cup and add that in. And I am going to just let that hang out for a couple minutes, 2-3 minutes will do the trick, so that it can start to rehydrate and incorporate. And if you see any that are not getting hydrated back into the mixture, like they're kind of hanging out on top. Just use a spatula to just work it in. All right. So I could already see how much water my soy meat has absorbed. I have, you know, a little bit of water still hanging out at the bottom of the bowl, but a lot of it has definitely absorbed. And so I'll just give that about another minute as I keep going through the ingredients. I will be adding, as I mentioned, my oil. I have half a cup, but I'm going to start off with adding a quarter cup to this. And then the other quarter cup I'll add as I cook as needed, just to give it that fat content. So half a cup may seem like quite a bit. This will feed, you know, probably about 4 people or so, especially if you have sides, like if you have rice, beans, the tortillas, all these things, right? And so half a cup for 4 people isn't too much. But the other thing to consider is that, you know, this soy meat has no fat in it. And if you're trying to recreate something that is supposed to feel very much like a meat that has that fatty texture that we're used to, then you have to recreate that. And you're doing it with this oil. So I'm going to go ahead and pour in a quarter cup of my oil into this mixture. It's been hanging out for maybe a couple minutes now. Maybe not, maybe I'm just rushing through or so, but it's absorbed a lot of that liquid. So I have that going in, and then I'm going to add my dry spices. So let's talk a little bit about these dry spices, some umami here. So I have an ingredient that I like to use often if you've taken some of my other classes. I have here 2 tablespoons of cumin powder, and I should have started in order here. Let me start with my 1 tablespoon of chile California. So if you don't have chile California, any sort of like mild chili powder or chile powder will work. It's not so much about spiciness and heat, it's more about depth of flavor. So you don't need it to give the dish a big kick of spiciness of capsaicin. You just need that flavor enhancement. So I have here 1 tablespoon of chile California, and then I have my 2 tablespoons of ground cumin. If you have whole cumin seeds, you can definitely grind them in a spice grinder and use them. And then I have 2 teaspoons of dried oregano, and that's going to go in. You can use Mexican or Italian oregano, whatever you have on hand. Italian oregano is typically the smaller leaves that you see most at grocery stores. And then I also do have a quarter teaspoon of coriander powder. So all this is going to go in, and it's going to help give it this nice, nice kind of like low level of flavor. Like it's going to be our foundation essentially. And then the ones that are going to give it a little bit more of these higher notes are these other dry spices. So I have here 2 tablespoons of mushroom powder. I'm using porcini mushroom powder. You're more than welcome to use any mushroom powder that you might have on hand. And so this mushroom powder is really what's going to help give our soy meat that meaty flavor, because mushrooms really do that. They enhance the any plant-based ingredients to the point where they feel pretty close to a meat, which is why they're used in some quite a few meat alternatives. And they're just an ingredient that I love to use all around. Porcini is one of my favorites. You can definitely use shiitakes or whatever you have on hand. If you have whole dried mushrooms, you can throw them in a high power blender or food processor and break them down until they are powder form. If you have any pieces in there, that's fine. If they're small enough, they're going to really mix into the dish. So it doesn't have to be a super fine powder like this. And then I also have 1 tablespoon of nutritional yeast. Now, nutritional yeast is an ingredient that I typically use in my cheese recipes, but it has this nice, like earthy, nutty, yeasty flavor that it really enhances many dishes. They don't necessarily have to be cheese, and it's just enough to be in the foreground to make you wonder, like, like what is that? There's something back there in my palate that I'm tasting that's so delicious, but I'm not really quite sure how to pinpoint what exactly it is. So 1 tablespoon of nutritional yeast will do that for us. We'll go ahead and sprinkle that in. So that was the 2 tablespoons mushroom powder, 1 tablespoon nutritional yeast. I'm going to go ahead and salt and pepper this to taste. So I'll go ahead and add a couple pinches of salt. I don't want to add too much salt because we're going to add a bit more salt with our liquid aminos, which I'll talk about in a couple minutes. And I'm going to pepper this. So salt and pepper to taste. I will likely add more salt, but let's wait and see. But just to kind of get it going. And I'm just going to use my spatula here to get that all well incorporated. Now, again, we've only added our 1.5 cups of liquid. So if yours is looking a little bit dry, I would advise you to just wait until we add the liquid ingredients next up. And if it still looks dry, then add your additional 1/2 cup of water. So let's wait and see if we end up needing that. If you've already added it, no sweat. Let's, you can totally see if it is too liquidy. And to be honest with you, even if it does feel too liquidy for you, there's going to be a certain amount of evaporation that's going to happen as this is searing on the skillet. So you will definitely, don't sweat it if you feel like it has too much liquid. So this is already starting to look very much like a carne asada. It hasn't even been cooked yet, but it already is starting to have that texture and that feel. So I'm going to set this aside for just a moment, and I'm going to go into some of our other ingredients here. So we're going to be using some orange, some lemons. I have 2 lemons that I've already sliced. I have 1 orange that I've cut in half. It's pretty small. If yours is as small as mine, you're welcome to use 2 of them or 1.5, whatever you have on hand. And then I also have some ginger here. So for the ginger, I want it to be minced. What you want for the ginger is, again, this depth of flavor, but you don't want it to overpower the dish. So you don't want this to end up tasting like some sort of a, perhaps like an Asian stir-fry dish or something like that. You just want it to kind of be in the back note as another flavor enhancer that doesn't overpower the dish. So the way that I like to do this is I like to use a microplane, and I'm going to bring that out in just a moment. It's a tool that you might have on hand. You might have a grater on hand. A grater would be really good too. Or you could use a knife and mince it, but just make sure that you give it a really fine mince, because what I don't want in this dish is I don't want to bite into a piece of ginger and taste the ginger. I want it to kind of like melt into the rest of the dish. So I pretty much just went ahead and peeled all of that skin off. And so I'm just left with this ginger root that doesn't have the skin on it. And I'm going to, I don't know why I have this like cut. Hold on one second. That keeps opening on me. It's like right on my knuckle. All right. So here we go. So I have my ginger root, and again, it's just the flesh of the ginger, and I have my microplane. So if you have something like this or a grater, you can definitely use this, or of course you can absolutely use your knife and mince it up. And so I'm just going to use this grater, and I'm just going to grate. You can grate into a bowl or directly onto your cutting board. Most of it's going to stay stuck to your grater itself, and some of it will start to fall down onto your cutting board. If you start to find that it's too fibrous, you can just flip it over and continue to go ahead and grate this all up. And so I want to grate this or mince it until I get about 1 teaspoon of ginger. So it's not a whole lot of ginger. It's, again, just enough to give that little flavor enhancement, not enough to overpower the dish. So let me go ahead and check to see how much ginger I have here so far. And I'm literally going to just take my teaspoon measurement, and I'm just going to check. So I'm almost there. I'm just going to grate a little bit more and get that final amount of ginger that I need for this recipe. So I'm just turning. There we go. I was like, why is this not grating? Because duh, you were on the wrong side. All right. So the other thing that is good about the grating is obviously you see I'm leaving behind all this the fiber, this like fiber that is gonna look like a, you know, like little hair almost in your dish. Okay. So I'll go ahead and grab all of my ginger here until I get my teaspoon, which this should be. Yep, I have my teaspoon of ginger here. And so let's get into these liquid ingredients. I'll set that aside. I'm gonna bring my bowl of carne asada back in. And so I'm gonna add my 1 teaspoon of grated ginger. I have my citrus squeezer, and I'm going to add my 2 lemons. I'm just gonna squeeze that right in. And this is gonna give it that nice bit of acidity. It's also gonna give it a little bit of sweetness with the orange juice. Like if you've ever, you know, back in the day when I used to go buy carne asada preparada, which obviously wasn't cooked yet, like it's to cook at home. You know, you'd have like orange slices in there, strands of cilantro. Sometimes people would add beer to it. You can absolutely add beer to this. You know, that could absolutely replace some of the water that you're adding. You can add a beer that you have on hand. So you can absolutely keep adding to this to enhance the flavor of the carne asada. So all those elements will really like stack on or continue to layer on these flavors. And the citrus in here is also going to give it a little bit of brightness too, because if we're only using these like, you know, really umami rich flavors like the nutritional yeast and the liquid aminos that we're about to add and the mushroom powder, then it kind of hits like a low note of savoriness, which like low meaning like it's, you know, it will coat your tongue, it'll taste savory, it'll be good, but the citrus is going to kind of help it vibrate and become more of this like fresh tone too, that's going to amplify the flavor in a way that makes it even better. So I'm adding now my orange juice here. This is the last of it. And then I'm going to add a couple of liquid ingredients here, a couple more liquid ingredients, I should say. So I'm gonna bring in my apple cider vinegar. I have my liquid aminos. I'm gonna measure these out right now. And then an optional ingredient that I have here is this liquid smoke. So this is gonna give you that, like I just got the carne asada from the grill in the backyard with the perro. This is it right here. It's gonna help you get a little bit more of that carne asada vibe, that feel. So I am going to grab my measuring spoons and I'm going to measure out here my liquids. So I'm going to grab my apple cider vinegar, and it may seem like quite a bit, but this acidity is going to be super necessary for the dish. It's 4 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. So we'll go ahead and add the 4, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to add 4 teaspoons of liquid aminos. So earlier I mentioned the salt, right? We salted already a little bit just to layer on that flavor, but this liquid aminos is also going to provide some saltiness. So we're going to add our 4 teaspoons, and then we can give this a taste to see where it's at and if it needs any more salt. Of course, this is, I think that was 4 I was talking, but I'm pretty sure that was 4. So you can absolutely taste this while it's raw because it's not meat, right? So you can give it a taste, see how it feels. Now for the liquid smoke, again, this is an optional ingredient. And I will say with liquid smoke, a little bit goes a long way. You don't need a lot of liquid smoke. In fact, when you open it, this is hickory smoke. So it has this like kind of bacony feel to it. So I want to add enough where it gives it this slight note of smoke, but it shouldn't taste like smoked meat. It should not taste like barbecue. So I'm going to add into my measuring spoon just a few drops. It's probably gonna be like just a dash, like maybe like 1/8 of a teaspoon. And this is a 1/4 teaspoon, so I'm just gonna add in a few drops here. It's probably like 1/3 of that. And I'm just gonna drizzle that on there. Now keep in mind, if you want more of that smoky flavor, you can always, always, always add more, but you can never take it away. So start light and then give it a taste. And if you feel like, oh, I really love that smoky flavor in here, I want a little bit more, then add a little bit more. But add little by little, give it a taste and see how you're feeling about it. So now my carne asada has this nice liquid base in here, and it is looking super nice and juicy. It has absorbed quite a bit of that liquid, yet I still have a little bit of liquid at the bottom. Not very much, just a little bit that is at the bottom. I'm going to give this a taste. It needs just a touch more salt. Add a little pinch more. And then I am going to transfer this to my skillet to start heating up here. And my skillet, I did have it on very low heat, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it up to medium heat. And I'm going to just add that mixture to my pan. So you should hear maybe a little bit of sizzling happening. And you want to cook this on like medium low. And hopefully you're seeing my pan right now, right? Everybody could see that. There we go. So I'm going to get every little last drop of it out. And now the trick is to let this cook to your desired level of doneness. So you have this oil that's also here. We still have our 1/4 cup of oil. And so you want this to sear. And of course, it's already a brown color, but you want to see like that searing, that browning happening. And then you can add more oil as needed. You have that additional 1/4 cup to play with. And the other thing I will say is like, it should take somewhere between, I like to cook this for, 20, 25 minutes or so. And while that's going, you can prepare other things. You can dice your onion that you're going to use to top it. You can mince your cilantro. You can make tortillas, which is what I'm going to do now. You can do a variety of things during that time to get your whole dish ready to go. Any questions for folks who are cooking along? I want to make sure you're good.
I had a question, Jocelyn. I actually used soy curls because I didn't have the other soya. Is it going to take around the same amount of time?
Yeah, it should take around the same amount of time. You just want to, again, make sure like you're getting it seared all around, that you're getting that brownness. So it should be fine, because like, it's not like, oh, it has to cook all the way through. Like the main thing is that the marinade penetrates all the way through, and then you want to get that searing happening on the outside.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, of course. Okay. All right, so I'm going to just clean up my station, and I'm going to get started on some tortillas. All right. Okay. Perfect. All right, I'm gonna get a glove on because now I'm gonna get into the masa, and my little knuckle is not happy today. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about masa. So today I'm gonna be using just Bob's Red Mill masa harina. I also have Hacienda on hand. Sometimes I have Gold Mine on hand. These are all brands that I highly recommend. And honestly, I'm pretty open to most brands as long as they focus on just having organic corn with a trace of lime. And that's it. It shouldn't have all these other preservatives and ingredients in there that are sometimes binders, sometimes, preservatives, sometimes, doing all these things to help it stay on the shelf for an even longer period of time. One of these brands being Maseca, which is probably the most prominently known masa harina brand out there that's sold at most Mexican grocery stores. You want to try to avoid brands like that and really stick to ones that are just literally corn, trace of lime. So this is a organic golden corn that I'm going to be using. You can use white corn, blue corn, whatever you might have available or on hand. And I'm just going to be using 1 cup of the dried masa harina. Now, the reason you want to use masa harina versus a cornmeal, lots of people have asked, oh, can I, use a cornmeal instead? And you don't want to do that because masa harina has gone through this process called nixtamal, which means that the process has, the corn has gone through this time where it's been in cal or calcium limestone that has allowed the exterior husk of the corn to essentially be removed throughout that process. I'm going to give my carne asada a little stir here so that I don't just cook it all on one side and not the other. So as I was saying, for the nixtamal, it's definitely gone through this like period of the cal really transforming the sort of the way that corn can then be broken down and digested. So Bob's Red Mill has already done that for us. All these other brands have done that for us. It's gone through nixtamal. They've dried it once again and ground it into a flour to make our lives so much easier. They've saved hours upon hours of time for us. And so all we essentially have to do is add water. Now, I personally also like to add a little bit of oil and salt to my masa harina. That's a personal preference. Totally up to you whether you would want to do that. And typically for most masa harina, you would add equal parts water to the dry flour. However, other circumstances do come into play, whether you're in a dry area, whether it's summertime and it's really hot, or if it's really cold, some of these things play with how much liquid you need to add. And so that's when you really have to feel the masa. So it's really hard to give like an exact precise recipe for masa because you have to essentially put your hands in the dough and feel it out. So I'm going to add 1 cup of this hot water that hopefully is still hot. Yeah, it's still hot. To my 1 cup of masa harina, and I'll pan down here. The other thing I will say as you're pouring your masa harina out of your bag or whatever it came in is that you want to pour it out into your measuring utensil or measuring receptacle versus putting your scoop in and scooping out of the bag, because likely what you're doing is compacting the amount of masa harina, the amount of flour that you're using, and it's going to be, that will also yield like a more dry masa, which is why you'll likely have to use a little bit more water too. So all I'm doing is I'm using a spatula here because obviously that was really hot water, and the hot water is reactivating this masa harina. It's gonna absorb into the masa. It's gonna look really liquidy at first, and then it might look a little dry, and we'll kind of see if it needs anything else in the process. And the other thing is, if your masa, which mine actually looks a little bit too moist, if yours looks a little too moist, you could do a couple things. You can add a little bit more of the masa harina powder to it to absorb some of that excess moisture, or you can let this just hang out for a little while. And I like to spread it out in my bowl and really let air hit all areas of this masa. And that will naturally allow evaporation to happen in around, different areas. And then you can amasar the masa or knead the dough to see if it's just right at that point. I will add a little pinch of salt here. And again, totally up to you if you want to add that little bit of salt to your masa. I'm going to let this hang out for just a moment before I decide whether I want to add more liquid or not, because I feel like the liquid needs to absorb into the masa right now. And so we'll give that just a moment. Let's go back to our carne asada. And my carne asada here is looking pretty good. It's getting slightly browned and kind of crispy in some areas. I'm going to hit it with a little bit more of my oil and let that keep going and cooking along, letting those flavors really meld together and letting it that heat really allow the ingredients to bloom in this dish. Okay. So
Jocelyn, could you repeat medium high or medium low heat?
Medium low heat. So you want to, I have it on medium low, especially because right now I'm going between cooking that and making tortillas, and I don't want it to cook too quickly. So like a medium low. I know that all stoves are slightly different, and sometimes it also depends on what kind of pan you're using. So I'm using a cast iron skillet. It's a pretty thick cast iron, which means that it's cooking fairly evenly. Like when it heats up, the heat kind of distributes evenly throughout the pan. If you're using something that's thinner, like a Teflon thin aluminum pan, then you might have it be like really hot in one area and then not so hot in another. So that's why it's good to have like thick pans, pots, so that you have more even cooking happening. All right, so I'm back at my masa and I'm gonna pan down, and I am just checking in to see how it's looking. It's still looking a little moist to me. And the trick for masa is, you know, if you put your hands to it and you start kneading it and it starts sticking a lot to your hands, that means there's too much moisture there. So again, option to spread it out and let it kind of do its thing with that air. And this works really well, especially in the summer when it's really hot, because it just evaporates so quickly with the heat. Right now it would take a little bit longer. We're in, you know, California winter or Los Angeles winter, which is like non-existent. So it'll take a little bit longer. So again, you can sprinkle on, for example, you know, you can just grab a couple pinches or a tablespoon, depending on how much you feel like you need. And you can kind of spread that out and incorporate it in and see how your masa harina is coming together. Now this is still hot too, because I did add that hot liquid, which is why I'm not really getting my hand into it just yet. I will get it in there in just a moment to continue to amasar the masa. All right. All right, it's getting there. And I also mentioned adding a little bit of oil. So I'm just gonna add a little splash of oil. Again, this is that grapeseed oil that I have on hand for cooking. I'll just add a little dash of that to my masa. I like to add oil just because I feel like it gives me a little bit of this like pliability with the masa harina. Some people I know add even lard to their corn tortillas. It's kind of family to family, region by region, or sometimes it's like for specific dishes that they'll make the tortillas a certain way, slightly different than they normally do. So it's just something that I like to do just to give it a little bit of like that, you know, flavor profile, kind of fattiness to my masa. I'm going to check on my carne asada once again, making sure that I'm stirring it, getting all these like little crispy bits mixed in and well incorporated. All right. Any other questions coming up so far as I get this masa almost ready to go? Everybody good so far? Okay, I see the thumbs up right there. Okay. All right. So for this masa, essentially what you want to be able to do is use your hand to kind of like create a dough. This still feels a little bit moist to me. It's not sticking as much to my hand, but still feeling a little bit of moisture. And you know, you want it to be sort of this like Play-Doh consistency that is really pliable, but that doesn't stick to your hand. Now I'm wearing a glove on this hand, so it's not really foolproof. Here you can see the proof on my hand that it's still not all the way ready for me to start working with it. It's still sticking to my hand. So again, giving it a little bit of time. I'm going to add just a touch more of this dry masarina powder and just mix that in. So this is what we call tanteando. And in fact, I have a friend of mine who works really closely with a really famous Mexican chef, and they make their own tortillas. And she has found that, you know, they have a recipe book for all the things that they do, and they just can't get the recipe. It's not precise. They have to really use their intuition, for lack of a better word, to really feel the masa and get a sense of like when it's ready, if it has too much moisture, too little moisture, really depending on the elements and the atmosphere and everything, the moon, calculating the moon, the sun, all the things. All right. Let me just continue to work that in. I'm going to use my glove here. And I like to kind of like punch it down, get it really well incorporated. All right. And let me give that just another couple moments as we move back to our carne asada. And I will say that I do have, if you are looking at my pan, I have a comal right behind my pan. And that comal has been preheating at about low heat this whole time. I just turned it up to medium so that it's ready to go when I'm ready with my masa. All right, I'm gonna hit it with a little bit more oil. I'm gonna give it another taste just to see how I'm feeling. I use that really small orange, like I mentioned. So if I'm feeling like, okay, now this has had some time to cook, that orange, that sweetness of the orange has like kind of melded in, maybe it needs to get hit with a little bit more of that fresh orange. I can add more. You can taste and see, oh, maybe I could add a bit more liquid aminos or salt or lemon juice. That is tasting really good. It could use maybe a touch more. I want to say it could use a touch more orange juice. So I could go ahead and add that now that I'm really feeling the flavor come together. And you should taste a little bit of this, like obviously like savory flavor profile, kind of like that, hitting the notes of the like meatiness, because the texture also has that. And it should have like a little back note of like sweetness, tanginess to it. So you have to make sure that you're getting all those notes in. So I have another orange right here. Actually, this is a tangerine. Let me grab an orange. And these are super teeny tiny, so which is why I'm gonna add another one. So I have another teeny tiny orange that I'm gonna add that are also not super, super juicy. So I wanna make sure I get that flavor profile of the orange good in there. So I'll just go directly over my pan. And the other thing that the flavor or the orange is gonna do in this dish is it's providing a little bit of sugar. So, we didn't add any sugar to this dish, but the orange juice definitely is gonna give a little bit of that. And that's gonna provide some caramelization, so aside from, the oil allowing us to crisp up the carne asada, the textured soya, the orange juice is gonna allow that browning to also happen with those sugars. All right. So I have my other orange in there now. So it should feel a little bit more balanced on that kind of sweet tanginess of the orange. And I will give it one more taste and circle back to my tortillas. Give it another pinch of salt. All right, we're getting there. All right. I almost would like to add a touch more of that hickory smoke, liquid smoke, but I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna let it keep cooking and see how it feels in the next few minutes before I add any more to it. Now let's get into tortillas. All right. Let me get my area ready here. So for the tortillas, you can absolutely, do the old school method, like pat the masa in your hands. If you're a pro like that, I've been trying to make tortillas for a long time, and that's still a skill that I'm working on, that my mom has down. And tortillas are typically, if you're still working on it, they'll be a little bit thicker when you do that. I'm going to be using a prensa, and I'll talk a little bit about this prensa that I have, which I really like. You can also, if you don't have a prensa, you could use a clear baking dish, like a clear pie dish or a cake dish or something like that. Something that's kind of thick and sturdy, like a baking dish. Because if you use a clear eating dish, like a flat plate, it might be not as sturdy, and you need to apply a good amount of pressure to it. So you just want to use something thicker so that it won't break on you, essentially. And so I'm going to be pressing here. If you have a countertop like mine, that is just a flat surface with no grout, it's not tile, it's just like one big piece of stone, you can press directly on here with obviously using these either plastic or you can use parchment paper or wax paper. I'm going to use 2 pieces of wax paper. This is like what you would put in between burger patties. And this is what we use for todo verde. So I have plenty of these on hand. You could also use, just a Ziploc bag that you cut all around the edges, and maybe cut the zipper part off of the Ziploc bag and use that. And then the tried and true señora method is just the bolsas del mercado. Like, oh, I already got the limones right here, the naranjas. Let me cut up this bag, and boom, we got tortillas now, So really up to you. And then the prensa that I'm using here is one from this brand called Victoria. And it is made out of cast iron. As you can see, I really like cast iron. My comal, my skillet, my prensa is all made out of cast iron. And I like to use cast iron mostly because this is something that's going to last a lifetime. I'm not going to need to buy another prensa unless I want it for other reasons that, I can always season it, clean it well. It's going to just last forever and ever. And what I also like about this prensa, and it's not too expensive either. I would say it's probably in the, I can't remember exactly, but maybe $20, $30 price range. But what I also like is because the cast iron is pretty heavy, when you close the prensa to press down on the tortilla, it provides a really even tortilla, and you don't have to apply too much of your own pressure to it because this is already so heavy on its own. Now, the ones that you typically find at Mexican grocery stores are those like more like the cheap aluminum ones. Those will work, but sometimes I find with those that the tortillas will come out a bit uneven. Those will start to rust after a little while if you are not cleaning them properly, and then you just throw them away because they were so cheap. It's easy to throw it away and buy another one. So, I highly recommend choosing something like this that will last a lot longer, especially if you're making tortillas on a regular basis. I'm going to give my carne asada one more stir as I get into this. Okay. Just making sure I'm not burning this and that it's still crisping along. I'll hit it with that last little bit of oil. And then I will move on to start making tortillas. Now again, I've turned on my comal to about a medium. You can go like medium high heat. And my masa here has had some time to hopefully allow some of that excess moisture to evaporate slightly. And I always say that the first tortilla is like a test. You know, you gotta do the first test and see how your masa is working, if you need to adjust anything slightly, and then you can make a second one. So let me go ahead and add some masa to my prensa. So I have here about a walnut size of masa. It's not really sticking to my hand this time around. It's still a little bit moist, but it's definitely, it is definitely usable. So I'm going to add this to my one sheet of wax paper, add the other sheet on top. If you're using plastic or parchment, you can fold it in half, whatever works best for you. You can cut it into two separate pieces. I like to keep the point facing the center because the press will press it really close to the handle, and just apply a gentle amount of pressure. You can check it to see where it's at. And it is definitely pressed a lot closer to that side. I'll flip it over, see if I can get it to come a little bit closer to the handle side here. Apply another little bit of gentle pressure, and see, I went a little too far. So I pushed a little too far, but that's totally fine. So if you find that with your prensa or your Pyrex or whatever you're using, that the tortilla doesn't come out just right, it's totally okay. You can absolutely just redo it. So for example, for this, if I'm like, you know what, I don't want that cut off piece right here, I'm just going to remove this all from this wax paper, and I'm going to just start over again. And I can just put that onto the masa and peel it back. Now, I will say that this still feels a little bit moist to me because it's so hard to peel off of the wax paper. It shouldn't be this difficult. So it's good that you're watching me now, because you're watching like all the things that could go wrong with your tortilla, which probably happens to people, and they're like, I don't know how to make tortillas. All that needs to happen here is my masa just needs to dry out. And it's interesting because I had that really hot water, and my masa, I mean, my house is cold. I'm wearing a big old sweater, but my masa is super cold. It's super cold right now. So I'm going to sprinkle it with just a touch more of this masa harina, not a lot more, because it will cook obviously like with the heat from the comal, but I don't want to add so much more that I'm like adding too much raw masa harina. And let me go ahead and work that in. All right, let's see, masa, how you're doing now. And the thickness of your tortilla, I like tortillas that aren't too thin. Some folks like them really thin. I like my tortilla to have a little bit of thickness to them. So, you know, that also varies on like what your personal preference is. But I like to have a little bit of that thickness because then it feels very much like tortillas hechas a mano. They have that little extraness to them. So let me go ahead and press my tortilla here. All right, that's a good size there. So I'll peel back one side. And then two things you can do. You can put it onto the palm of your other hand and gently peel back the paper. Or sometimes what we do if we're like quickly going through service with Todo Verde is if you're using like a wax paper like I am, you can just throw it on the grill and then it'll stick to the grill a little bit, the masa will, and you can peel back the paper a little bit easier. Now my masa is still pretty soft, so I'm like struggling. It shouldn't take this long to take this off here, but we will get this on the grill and it will start to cook. There we go. All right, here is my tortilla ready to go onto the comal. Now I have my comal that is really hot, slightly smoking, and I'll go ahead and throw that onto the comal. And with the tortilla, let me make sure it's in the frame here. Now with the tortilla.
Jocelyn, did your phone overheat?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Okay. Let me just bring my laptop over. I was like, wait, I could see my comal, but the tortilla is not there. All right, so let's come here. So you can see the tortilla there. You want to cook it for about 20 seconds on the first side. You should be able to start being able to slightly move it around. It's almost getting there. Almost there. Let me lower my temperature just a tad bit. And then essentially what you want to do is like seal that first side. You'll start to see the edges slightly curling up and cooking. And then you should be able to kind of start peeling it back. Mine is not releasing just yet. There we go. And then you should be able to flip it over. So it sticks to the pan, it seals, and then once it seals, you can move it and it'll release from the pan. So recently I was helping somebody through this process of cooking tortillas, and she was like, mine always sticks. So I add oil to the pan, to the comal, and I kind of like pan fry them in a little bit of oil. Now it's just because she was not allowing the tortilla to kind of like hang out for at least 20 seconds and create that seal, that barrier. She was trying to flip it and I was like, just wait, be patient with it. And sure enough, it worked for her. So I'm gonna flip it back to this original side. Sometimes your tortilla will puff, sometimes it won't. It totally depends on like just having the right amount of heat source coming through, you know, how thick your tortillas are, if it's sealed properly all around. If there's like any tears in it, then the vapors are escaping through those tears, so it won't puff up. So there's a lot of factors that play into that. Don't feel like, oh, my tortilla days are like not, you know, working out that great. It's totally fine. Keep making tortillas and you'll find that maybe perhaps after making like this, you know, the next one or the third one, the fourth one, that you'll start to get a little bit better at the process. And I always say the first one is always the struggle. And then after the first one, it's so much better. So I am going to go ahead and remove this tortilla from my comal. And I'm going to, real important in here, I'm just going to wrap it in a towel. Now I have a tortilla holder. I didn't bring it down, but you can definitely put it in something to make sure that it's holding that heat. And then the other thing is sometimes people are like, how do I know if it's, you know, mine feels overcooked, maybe it's a little bit stiff, or it feels a little undercooked. Now, once you start to stack your tortillas that you're cooking in this towel, you'll find that the steam will create these really beautiful, soft, tender tortillas throughout. So let me go ahead and make another tortilla. I'll bring you back to my counter here. My poor phone. All right, it's actually back. So let me try to see if I can get it back on here for a second. There we go. All right. And I'll lift it up so you'll have to look at it from like a distance. There we go. Can you see that okay? Cool. Okay. All right, so let's make one more tortilla here. So again, just I like to amasar, especially if like you walked away from your masa for a while, because what you'll find is that the masa that was touching the bottom of the bowl is going to be more moist, and the masa that was sitting on top is going to be a little bit dried out just because of the evaporation that's happening. So you want to give it a little bit of a kneading or a little bit of mixing and distribute it throughout. Now I will go ahead and press this tortilla until I get a nice round, slightly thick tortilla. Now, as I was saying earlier, if you don't have this prensa, you could use that plastic baking dish. So what you would do is put the plastic, or sorry, the glass baking dish, I should say. You would put the plastic on your countertop or the parchment paper, put the masa there, put the other piece of plastic or parchment paper on top, and then use that clear baking dish to just push down and apply that pressure until you have your tortilla ready to go. So again, I'm going to gently peel back my paper here. You can see number 2 tortilla is already treating me a little bit better. Now I have my comal nice and hot, and let me go ahead and drop that tortilla down. Give it about 20 seconds on that first side. I'll flip it over, give it another 20 seconds, and then I will flip it back on the original side. So it's gonna go first side 20 seconds, second side 20 seconds, back to the original side 20 seconds, and then you can flip it back to the second side again. Some people like to kind of flip them back and forth a little bit, but really if it only goes, if it flips that, you know, goes down, flip once, flip twice, you should be okay. So, and then as your tortillas are cooking, you can definitely keep rolling balls of masa. You can start pressing some and getting the rest of your tortillas going. So any questions, especially if anybody is making tortillas a mano? How is it working out for you? Susana's like, girl, I've been having my tortillas ready. I'm about to cook. I mean, I'm about to eat dinner. You are tripping, you know? All right. And I'm forgetting about flipping my tortilla. This is how I get caught up. When I'm teaching a class, I start talking. So here's my next tortilla ready to go down into my comal or onto my comal. And again, for your tacos, you can definitely top them with a simple garnish of just onions, chopped onions, minced cilantro, and some salsa, whatever you might have on hand, a little slice of lemon. I'm gonna start assembling a taco. Let me turn my tortilla here. Let me see if I can turn this tortilla. There we go. Okay. So my carne asada is ready to go. I'll pan over so you can see a little bit. And it has definitely, you know, browned even more so, right? It was already a brown marinated mixture, but it's browned even more. I have some searing that's happened. It smells really good. And again, this is like a baseline. So if you're like, I really love, you know, the citrus notes, I really want mine to taste more orangey, whatever it is, you can keep adding to it or adjusting to make it like your personal preference of carne asada. Because we all know that we have different places we like to buy asada from in the past, at least for me. And so it's a matter of getting to that close enough texture. Now, the last thing I need to get is just cilantro because I didn't want to pull it out too early and have it wilt on me. All right, so I have a little bit of cilantro and I'm just gonna mince this up and then I'm gonna plate my dish. So I have my cutting board here. I'm just gonna cut this in half. I'm not gonna do a whole lot of cilantro just so we can get through this last little bit here to plate and then take a bite. So you just wanna mince. I mean, you can do whole leaves if you wanted to, but the mincing makes it feel more like a street taco. And And I've already diced up some onion, just some yellow onion. And I'm just gonna mix some of this cilantro with my onion. I'm just gonna mix it on the top because I did not add enough cilantro right now, but I wanna get into plating. So you wanna kind of like evenly distribute the onion and the cilantro. And then I'm going to grab my plate. I'm gonna grab a tortilla that we just made. Nice thick handmade tortilla that is nice and pliable and soft. You can see here how thick it is. It has that pliability. And I'll go ahead and stack on some of my carne asada. And I could have swore I had some salsa here somewhere. I'm like, how could I, oh, here it is. I'm like, how could I lose a whole bowl of salsa? All right, so here is my taco. And then of course my little bit of cilantro and onion. And the onion, you know, I'm not always the biggest fan of using onion in dishes, but there's some things that they go together, right? So, you know, this is one of them, that nice crunchy texture from the onion and that slight spicy kick from the onion, I think really makes the dish too. And then of course, a little bit of salsita, whatever you have on hand. I have here just like a salsa de verde de tomatillo that I'm adding. And here is our finished taco de carne asada. So any questions? Susana, I'd love to know how it's tasting for you.
I love it. My sister couldn't believe it. I made her 2 burritos already. She was like, it just like carne asada. It just tastes like it.
You just made 2 burritos right now?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Wow. You're like, I already sold like 5 burritos on the corner right now. I'm ready to go. Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she
I'm
really
glad
liked
you liked it. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Cheers, everybody. My big old guante. Wow, that is really good. Some nice fiery salsa roja would be really, really good in this too. It has that nice amount of moisture that is still in the asada. I'm actually gonna turn it off so I don't dry mine out. You know, it has that good amount of moisture. It has that searing that's happened that's been like that added flavor. I can taste a bit of that smokiness. It's like everything is subtle hints in the back note. It's not like an overpowering, like, oh, wow, this tastes almost borderline bacon or anything like that. So you want to get that nice balance. And I feel like this really has it. So any other questions out there for folks who are still cooking along? I know Leslie was cooking too. I'm gonna get my big old guante up in the video again.
So I made your tamales from the Saturday class.
Mm-hmm.
My grandparents are haters of all the vegan attempts I've made for them. So I was really excited when your book came out. I'm waiting for it from the library, but I made the recipe and they didn't want to try it, but they did. And they're like, when are you going to make these again? And the queso too, it was so sweet.
Oh, that is amazing.
Yeah,
I love that.
For the tacos right now.
Especially when it's like our parents, our abuelitos, because sometimes they're like, oh no, if it's not this way, well, you're tripping. You're like on your own thing, you know? So it's always cool to see like when they're like, oh, actually, yeah, that that is good, you know? Like I'll have another tamal, I'll have another taco. And the best of all, yeah, that's great. And like the best of all is when they don't even realize, like if you don't tell them, which they should know what they're eating, right? But sometimes it's a little fun if you know they're not allergic, you know? And you see them eating and enjoying it, and then they don't even know that they're not eating meat. It's so crazy. Like it makes you wonder, like, like, can you taste like, I feel like we have gotten like really close in our meat substitutes, but it's not always like 100% exactly the same. But the fact that folks don't even notice makes me wonder, like, their taste buds and like what they're eating, and like, wow, we could give you like a lot of plant-based food and you really would enjoy it. Because the main thing is like the spices, the care, the attention, adding lots of those umami bases will make most things taste really good. So I'm so happy your grandparents liked it. We'll see. You got to let me know what they think of the tacos.
I missed that. She already took a taco right now. So
she did. Okay, good. She's going to come over and be like, le falta sal, you know?
I took her a little spoon. I was like, ¿qué falta? She's like, nada.
That's great. That's awesome. Yay. Well, thank you so much, everyone. As always, you are more than welcome to reach out if you have any questions. I know some of you are going to be making this recipe later. So you can always reach out, DM us, email us, let us know if you have any questions, even if it's about the ingredients, like you're still searching for the raw ingredients, you can definitely reach out and ask us any questions. And I hope you enjoy it. And again, I hope you are safely able to share it with friends and family.